Okay, first off, welcome, and hope it's been a nice conference up until this point, and hopefully it'll be even better after this one. First I want to ask, how many of you actually identify yourself as CSS developers? About a handful. Well, good for you, and I hope you agree with me that CSS is at least in some way awesome, and perhaps other ones who are not CSS developers can also agree after this presentation. So what about me? Who's this guy? So I self-proclaimed myself as a unicorn in web designer terms, so I'm a person who can design and actually implement stuff on the front-end side pretty good. So at least that's what I think. And I've been dabbling with web and web technology since the beginning of the millennium, and doing Vaadin stuff since 2006, and concentrating on CSS and front-end GWT stuff there as well. So I'm the guy to blame for all the built-in themes and also the some of the built-in layouts in Vaadin. But as said, CSS is my main thing, and lately I've been starting to use Sass and the particular dialect of SCSS there. But also, as I said, I'm fluent in Java and GWT also. But not any heavy backend stuff, so that's kind of my background. But let's get to the awesome then. Things CSS can do, and that you perhaps might not know. First off, starting with some pretty basic stuff. Just selectors. So how many of you have used attribute selectors? I'd say, I would guess most of you, so you all know this. So you're selecting some input element, text elements, and well, there are other types of attribute selectors. So this is just targeting the actual complete value of the attribute, but you can also target like the start of the attribute value, so the prefix. And well, in the same vein, you can also target the ending of the attribute value. So these might be useful for something like targeting outbound links on your web app, like stuff starting with HTTP, or then targeting different file types ending with some .txt or .pdf, perhaps. But also, why not just the classes I've used here? So if you've used icon fonts ever, you've probably seen the starting with prefix there. But there are a few more of these also, but I just wanted to highlight this one. This is also quite useful. That's kind of what the regular class selector does, but it's a bit more kind of flexible, so you can target just one value in a space-separated list. And you can also combine as many attribute selectors together as you want, so you can chain these together. So pretty boring stuff, this actually, but sometimes might be useful. But what about pseudo classes? How many of you have used these or have seen this type of selectors? Yeah, about half. So what we here have is we're selecting every other element in the list there. So this is the same thing as to_n. So the n there starts counting from 0 and goes then to infinite and selects all the numbers or the children it matches there. But there are also other types of structural pseudo classes like this. So there's actually something like only child. So if I now reduce the list to one element, it only selects that one, and only when it's the only element inside that list. But this is curiously just a special case of this plus this. So that's the same thing. So now it matches the elements when there's only one of those. But how about if there are two elements and I want to match those? How would I do that? So I can actually relax this last child selector and do it nth last child selector. And now it's the same thing. But when we increase the number of the child elements, we'll have to do that now. So how can we fix that? Well, we can use the n value here. So just n plus 2, and now it selects the first child, which is also the nth last child, starting from 2. So if I now increase the number of the child elements, it's still selected. And once I go below 2, it's not selected anymore. And of course, we can put like something like 4 here. So now when you have 4 or more elements here, it gets selected. But what if we want to select all the elements, like the only child? We can make a combination of selectors here. So the first child and all the elements that come after it. So that's the general sibling combinator, the worm or wave character. And just so you know, all the elements inside the list are now B elements. That's why I typed B there. So it could be like div if those were divs, but now they're B elements. And now it selects all those elements once we have 4 or more elements inside the list. And you could do some crazy stuff like then only when it's an even number of items in the list, you could select them then and otherwise not. So those are sometimes pretty handy. You could, of course, do this with JavaScript and just add classes there when you have a certain number of items there. But just so you know, you can do that with CSS also. And attribute selectors, as you know, are very widely supported. So from IE 7 upwards, they're all supported. But IE 6 has no support. So if you have to support that still, I'm sorry that you can't use those. And structural pseudo classes are kind of great to use, but IE being a small party pooper here. Only starting from IE 9. Okay, moving on. So something more interesting perhaps than just selectors. Font hacking. So how many of you have used web fonts in your projects? So maybe a third. Yeah. And this is kind of some neat things that you could do with web fonts. So how web fonts, CSS font stacks work. So if there's a character in a font, or if a font doesn't contain a character that you're using on your web page, it tries to look for that character in the next font family or font in the font stack. So you can provide fallbacks, in a sense. So what you can do is create a special font, a web font, that perhaps contains only one character, like I've done here. And well, the benefit of this is of course that the font's file size is really small because it contains only one vector character. And what I've done with this font is I've replaced the uppercase H with a symbol. So I have a heart symbol on the letter H. Well, maybe not so useful, but and just so you know that I'm not faking, I'm just going to delete that, and you see the regular H there. But perhaps a use case to this would be like styling some web-safe icons that are found in web-safe fonts, like arrows, for instance. So you could do something like this. So you have a Unicode arrow that's pretty much available in all platforms, and you could switch that to something more suitable to your application style. Now this is like the same Same syntax in both, same character in both, and I can just delete that there, and it's going to affect that one as well. So you now see that it's back to the original. And web font support is actually really good. So starting from IE6 up, you can use web fonts. And this kind of, well, there might be then cases when you don't have the fonts, so these kind of fallbacks, font hacking might make sense. So, but usually the fonts is going to be available anyhow, so the fallbacks never kick in. But it's good to keep in mind that sometimes maybe your icon fonts are not loaded, so you perhaps want to provide a fallback. And font stacks allow you to do that. Okay, well, moving on. Mouse cursors, you've probably used these. And what you use is the pointer. That's like the most usual thing that you use. And perhaps progress or wait. But there are also numerous other ones you could use, like copy or move. And all the arrows pointing in different directions, and zoom, perhaps. And there's the new grab mouse cursors, but currently only in WebKit. I mean, currently only using the prefix versions. And then there's the custom URL, so you can provide an image cursor, and that's very well supported as well. The only thing you need to remember is that you need to provide a fallback for the URL cursor, otherwise it won't show, so you need to specify an auto value after the URL for it to work. And these are also very widely supported, with small exceptions. And Internet Explorer being the bad guy again. But you could use like the URL versions for all those that the IE version doesn't support, and just work around it. Pseudo elements. Who knows what these are? Not too many, but well, let's see. Generated content is what you kind of use these for. And the before and after pseudo elements are the most common ones. Now that we're starting to get shadow DOM in browsers, these you will end up seeing more of these, but these are the ones that are now available widely. And you can use those to add content from the style sheet into your actual page. So you could argue that's a bad practice, but let's not get into that. But on top of just static content, so it's just a string that you place there, you can use counters, for instance. So you specify a counter name, call counter reset, my counter. Okay, inside that context, the ordered list, that counter is going to start counting from 1 to whatever number of times we call counter increment inside that context. And then you can reference that number in the content attribute using the counter function. And you can append any strings to that even. So with a regular ordered list, I just wanted to add the dash between the number and the actual content of the node instead of the dot that is usually there with ordered lists. And in a similar fashion, you can also grab attribute values from the DOM. So with this sort of HTML structure, we have a data attribute there called tooltip with a custom tooltip content. And we can then write this kind of CSS. Targeting any elements with the attribute data tooltip, we generate an element before that and grab the value of the data tooltip attribute into the new generated element. And with a little bit of extra CSS, hiding it and making it transparent, and then on hover making it visible again, we can have like a custom tooltip, sort of. And well, this could also be handy for instance, in a print style sheet, you could show all the link URLs after the actual link content link title. So when you print out the page, you can actually see what are the URLs for each link. And then some wacky use cases for generated elements. So if you didn't know, you can create all kinds of crazy shapes using just pure CSS, and not just a regular rectangle that you get. And just quickly gonna show you, so we can look at the heart, for instance. So it has 2 elements before and after element overlapping each other and having a slight border radius and at the other end. The only downside with these is that you can't really style these. They're just one-colored versions. You're gonna end up in strange situations if you try to actually make some shadows on them or stuff like that. But these are also pretty good support on browsers, and well, very widely used to add extra styles or styling to documents. And just a small tidbit that even though the official syntax is with the double colon syntax, the IE8 only supports the pseudo class syntax with one colon, so that's what I've been using here. Okay, moving on. Shadows. Who's been using shadows in their applications? Again, maybe a third or half. So you know that you can use a shadow, but what about multiple shadows? So if you wanted to, well, I'm using now here just one box shadow, one text shadow. So there's an icon font, the note, and the element has a box shadow on it. So what we're trying to create here is this. If you've been following the designer trends lately, this is kind of the thing currently, long shadows. So we can actually mimic that with CSS. So just with the comma-separated list, we can add as many box shadows as we want. And well, in this case, I'm using roughly 30 box shadows and 30 text shadows for this effect. And perhaps not the best thing to do if you're concerned about performance, and this could really bring your mobile device down in performance. Desktop browsers can handle this fine, but perhaps not the wisest thing to do. But then small tidbits about box shadows. Did you know that you can have an inset shadow? So let's see. So we can actually make the shadow, box shadow, go inwards on the element. And well, you can have negative offsets, of course. And the blur can be something, but let's keep it 0. But what's also quite neat is that you can play with the spread value. So if we specify a spread, it's going to go inwards. But the spread value also accepts negative values. And this can create nice shapes that are like not in the same radius as the original border radius. So we can create these kind of highlight effects and make some nice buttons or something using these box shadows. And of course, you can make that come from beneath or however you like, and just make as many as you need. And these are also very widely supported. So IE9 is even on board. But on IE10, I mean, for text shadow, IE9 just kind of, I don't know how they dropped the ball on that, but it's not supported there. So only IE10. Moving on, background properties. So you probably know what backgrounds do. Maybe not. So, kind of a new thing, or maybe not a new thing in itself, but what you probably didn't know about background attachment. So how scroll works. So fixed backgrounds, well, they stay fixed to the viewport when you scroll it, and they scroll with the viewport. And well, when you scroll the element, so these are overflow auto elements, and Well, that's not what we want. I was trying to mimic like a notepad effect here, like the lines would scroll with the text there as well, but neither of these provide the effect that I'm looking for. But luckily, there's now a third option called background attachment local, and that gives exactly what I want. So it actually scrolls with the viewport and with the element itself if it's scrollable. Not as widely supported yet as we'd like, but starting to become relevant and usable. At least if you're doing mobile development and not worrying about Firefox, it's pretty good. Something else, so background clip and origin. So by default, backgrounds are clipped and placed like this. So we have a transparent border around the element. So we can see that in the corner here, the background is starting from there. And well, that's kind of sad that the background is still repeating underneath this border. So we could just type padding box here, and well, now it's kind of better. So we can now see through the actual transparent border. And we can also use content box to clip it to the content. So there's padding inside the element. So now it's not visible on top of the padding either. And what the origin does is, it then forces the background to be rendered from the actual border box of the element. Well, you'd expect this content box to do something like this. Not very usable, but maybe sometimes you need that. If you use it together with the background clip, then you can make it start the rendering from the actual content box. So that's probably a use case there. And multiple backgrounds. So here we have the same background image in the back, and I placed another one on top of it. So the Safari logo. So you can just put as many as them on top of each other as you want. So we could actually place a radial gradient here, for instance. So let's see, transparent, 50%, and then to black. So we can do some sort of vignetting to the image this way. And well, linear gradient, I mean gradients in general, how they function is that you have the linear gradient function, and then you specify the angle in which direction the linear gradient goes. In this case, it goes from top to bottom, and we can actually use keywords here as well, to bottom or to top. It just changes the direction, and you can affect from where the actual transition starts to occur. So we can make it like make a full split between there, so you can make stripes with this step. Maybe perhaps some country's logo, I mean flag, maybe. And radial gradients, well, pretty much the same thing. Just starts from the center on outwards, and you can scale it down with these, how further along to the edges it stretches. And the support for these is, again, pretty good. IE8 being the drag here. And Opera still doesn't support background origin content box. And gradients, well, getting there, pretty good support already. But IE, again, and well, Safari just recently dropped the prefix version, and now they're also supporting the current standard version. We can take questions afterwards, yeah. Okay, CSS transformers. Who's been using transforms? A fourth, maybe? So the syntax of that. So you have the transform property, and it accepts a list of transform functions. And also to go along with that is the transform origin property, and a couple of handful of functions that you can then transform the element with. And I guess the best way to show these is also a demo. So here we have, this is the default origin, so it's in the center of the element. So the transform origin. I'll show you what that does in a minute. But we're translating the position of the element now, 50% of its own width and height. So if I would change that to 100, it would shift on the x-axis 100% of its width. And the background origin comes in with, for instance, rotate. So we'll just take that out for a minute. It now rotates according to the transform origin. So if we change that, you can see it rotates from a different corner, and now it's at the top left corner that the transform is made from. And now we can add these back here. Let's keep that there. And actually the order of the transforms matters here. So if we just switch these the other way around, we get a different result. So they are applied in a consecutive manner. So if we do the rotate first and then translate, you can see that it's actually moving alongside that rotated axis then. And well, you have the scale then also. You can scale it down or up. And what you can see here that it's if you transition these transforms, you can see that the intermediate states are not full resolution, so it only renders it at full resolution after the transition. Well, what about 3D transforms? Gets a bit more complicated, but not much. So this is quite an easy way to do 3D stuff inside the browser. We get a couple of new properties like perspective and perspective origin, and transform style and backface visibility, and a few 3D specific transform functions. So here we have a 3D transform. So the perspective is applied to the parent element. So you can't apply that to the direct element that you're transforming. So it needs to be the parent. And what the perspective does, it's the distance from the actual transforming plane. So it's kind of the depth of field, how close you're looking at the 3D scene. And the origin just then specifies at what angle you're looking at the 3D plane. And again here, we have these, now all the three different axes have their own functions for rotating. And again, since they're applied consecutively, you can now see that it's actually moving towards us since I rotated it in the y-axis. And then there's this transform style property that's very useful. So the default value is flat, and but it has the value of preserve 3D. So I have a ready-made piece of CSS that actually transforms the inner content of that element. So the flat means that it's actually the transform is made, but it's then flattened to the parent element's plane. But by specifying the preserve 3D, we can actually then start like building a hierarchy of 3D transforms. And you can see how that works. And if I just remove this transform style, it's going to vanish and just be on the plane of that parent element. Yeah, what else? Well, the functions. Well, you can pretty much guess from the names what those do. And what would be transformers without transformers? So had to have one transformer in the slides, so we can make him shoot out a beam from his cannon and rotate it around, and well, just dismiss that thing. Thanks, Bumblebee. But people are doing even crazier stuff with this, so I'm just gonna quickly show this if it loads. So we have like a first-person shooter here in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can actually jump around and look around, and well, there's some glitches here and there, but maybe not what you should be doing with CSS, but well, you can, so why not? Not made by me, by the way. And 2D transforms. They're very good support nowadays also, but 3D transforms, well, getting there little by little, and well, IE is still kind of preventing from us doing some fancy stuff, like, because it doesn't support the preserved 3D transform style, so it all just flattens to one plane. All right, let's move on to something more cutting edge than filters. You can actually have blur on your elements. So these are now prefix versions, so no standard versions of these contained. So this is an actual element, so you can select the text, and if I blur it, I can still select the text there. So these filters are applied after all the other painting has been done. And there are a couple of other filters you can use, like grayscale. So these can be anything, like any DOM elements you have. It could be text, images, whatever. You can make them grayscale. And these also accept fractional values, so you can have a partially grayscale image or just fully grayscale. And you can adjust the brightness also, bump it up, bring it down. And well, what you'd expect, you can also alter the contrast. Make it really, really, really contrasty. Or again, negative values also are supported. Should be. Oh, right, yeah. Not negative values, but fractional values, yeah. But these are, as I said, really cutting edge stuff, so not really supported anywhere except Opera and WebKit. And Opera, since it's using Blink currently, like Chrome. But if you want to provide fallbacks or just support filters, you can use SVG filters. So the syntax is a bit more involved, so you have some SVG code in your markup. But all of these are then supported by more browsers. Okay, moving on. Literally moving. So transitions. I bet you've heard of these as well. How many of you have used these in a production application? A handful, maybe 10. So it's a way to transition property values from one state to another. And that's the syntax, what it looks like. So you have the property, what you want to transform or transition, duration, a timing function, and a delay. That's kind of the shorthand version. You could specify those separately, like there's properties for transform, property, transform duration, transform the transition, timing function, and transition delay. But here's an example. So we can now, we've specified the all property here. So we're transforming all properties that the browser can and wants to transition. And well, if we change the width, you can see that it nicely animates that across 1.2 seconds, but we can make it faster. Maybe change the color to some, so you can transform pretty much all the properties that involve numbers in some way. And the transition timing functions are then what dictates how the, well, let's make it a bit longer so we can actually see it. So how the easing of it goes, so how it accelerates and decelerates during the transition. So the linear is like, it starts at the same speed as it ends. But then there's the ease in and ease out. It kind of, it starts accelerating and then decelerating at the ends. This is a kind of a pro tip. If you've used transitions and tried to transition to an auto value of, for instance, height, which is kind of a useful thing that you might want to do. So I have a container with some content. You don't know how much content there is. There might be text that is variable height coming from somewhere, the text. And you initially have it like collapsed, and you want to expand it with a nice animation. So if you try to do that by setting the height to 0 first, and then on hover, for instance, set it to auto, and want that to transition, it's going to happen like instantly, so there's no animation. But you can work around that by using max width and max height. Or in the case of the height, you're going to use max height. So instead of specifying height 0, you specify max height 0. And in the visible state, you just specify a large enough value, so it's kind of not bulletproof. But in most cases, it's enough, so you can actually transition to an auto value. So, but if you specify max height like for 9,000 or something, the transition is going to be very fast because it's going to go like all the way in your transition time. So that's why the large enough value is encouraged. Then animations, they're like transitions, but they allow you to specify intermediate states in the transition, what are called keyframes. And the syntax looks like this for the keyframe. So you can specify as many in-between steps as you want. I have 3 now here, so the beginning, middle, and end. And inside those, you can then define any properties you want to animate. Or just describe the states of the animation. And how do you trigger the animation is with this syntax. It looks pretty much like a transition. So you have the name, which specifies the properties that you want to animate there, and duration, timing function, delay, similarly. So we have let's see if I can zoom out a bit so we can see that all. So I have keyframes from translate 100 to 200. So if we check that out, so it's going to jump to the first keyframe once the animation starts. So it's going to jump there and transition. And once the animation is done, it's going to jump back to the original position. So these transforms are not like persisted after the animation in this case. There are other properties then that you can tweak to alter the animation. You can make it run multiple times or infinitely. So now it's going to just go on and go on and go on and go on forever until your battery runs out. You can change the direction of the animation. So we can play it reverse. So it starts from the last keyframe that we specified and transforms to the other direction. Let's make this animation iteration count infinite. So we can see then what the alternate does. And let's start that again. So there we go. So now it's going to bounce back and forth between the keyframes that you specified. And alternate reverse is the same thing, but it just, let's start it again now. It just starts from the other way around. And here we can see the easing animate or the timing function in play. So it just eases in the other direction. And if we switch to the playing it forward, you can see it starts a bit slower and accelerates to the end of the animation. And the easing function or timing function is also reversed when the animation is played backwards. Play state. We can also pause animations with CSS. So, for instance, you could pause an animation when someone hovers over something. So if I just remove that, it's going to start playing, and once I put it back, it stops. And well, JavaScript animations offer, of course, a lot of more flexibility than this. You can like start from wherever you want doing the animation and play multiple animations at the same time. Well, you can do that with CSS also, play multiple animations on the same element, but it's a bit more cumbersome. And well, now for the problem of the animation jumping to the first keyframe and not retaining its final state. So if you want to make the animation start from the first keyframe, or this affects now the delay, because there's a delay in the animation. So if we specify the fill mode as backwards, it's going to, for the duration of the delay, it's going to stay in the initial keyframe and start from that. And forwards is going to do then the opposite, so it's going to retain the last state of the keyframe. And both, well, that does what you'd expect, so it just places it at the first keyframe and leaves it at the last keyframe after the animation. And about these transitions and animations, you want to use the transform property to shift your elements around the page, because that is hardware accelerated and doesn't affect the other elements in the page, so it doesn't affect the flow of the document. And well, getting there as well with IE10, getting on board with these both, and Opera finally getting, well, Opera is now at Opera 18, so it's been quite a while there. WebKit still requires the prefix, others don't. So, but then just a small thing about how you would make these. So CSS preprocessors help you a lot with these cross-browser issues that there are. So you have these variables, functions, and mixins and whatnot. And mixins in particular are very handy for just keeping the browser vendor prefixes in one place in your code base, and then just once the browsers support the standard, you can just drop the vendor prefix in one place, and your final CSS is then cleaned up. And the options are usual suspects like Sass, which I prefer to use, and then there's less, which is pretty much offers the same things, but it's a slightly different syntax. And then the stylus has a bit different syntax, but again offers pretty much the same stuff as the previous two. I haven't used those that much, but you might want to check them out. Of course, GWT has its own preprocessor, but I'm not too fond of it myself because it involves the actual GWT compiler, so it takes a long time to iterate. And at least a few years back, it actually barfed at many of the CSS3 properties and like linear gradients and stuff like that. You'd have to work around the compiler to make those work. I haven't checked closure STYLIZED, so I don't know what that offers, but I guess that's an option as well. And one new kid on the block is Rework. That's kind of a framework that lets you build your own CSS preprocessor. So if you don't need all the bells and whistles of the Sass and stuff like that, you can just include the stuff you need or specify your own transforms to the output CSS. All right. Any questions, or is everything crystal clear? At least, can you pass the mic, or? Okay, so I'll try to repeat the questions. Well, let's start from there.
My question was about the CSS preprocessors. What has been your experience or methodology in integrating any of the CSS
I have none. Because personally, I don't do like plain with development. So, but I'd say just use the Ruby compiler in SAS. The other frameworks I haven't used that much either. But SAS, you can just use the command line compiler or any of the applications that actually have a UI that you can use, like library load or CodeKit on Mac. And for Windows, there's some applications also that kind of, they just poll for changes, the files, and just automatically compile that, and you can just keep refreshing the browser, and it just works. And actually, in this presentation, I'm using a JS library called Prefixer that's doing that stuff like prefixing all the vendor prefix properties on the fly. So you can just write the standard syntax in your own style sheets, and the prefixer is going to check that style sheet and then inject the prefixed versions to the actual DOM. Then. Yep.
So I ran into an issue actually just last week trying to adjust the speed of an animation in CSS. It seemed like if you set it to process infinitely, or you couldn't change the properties of the animation until it completed. Do you know of any way, any tips or tricks or CSS animations just can't use it?
Yeah, so the question was that, I guess maybe some of you saw during the presentation also, that when you try to change the animation properties during when the animation is actually running, it doesn't have any effect. So how could you overcome that? Is that the question? Yeah, so what I did here is just I completely removed the animation and then placed it back. So I guess that's one thing you could do. So I haven't run into this issue. Like, so you could use a timeout, for instance. Just remove the animation and put it back, and after you change the properties.
I guess the problem that I ran into with that was that you start over from point.
Yeah, it's gonna. Yeah, the problem is then it's gonna start from the beginning again. So you can't during the transforms because they're pre-calculated by the browser. So I would assume that there's kind of no way you can actually do that. So you can't change the animation once it's running. You have to wait it to finish. So good, because they're declarative. So the browsers kind of have to. They want to optimize the rendering of those, so they do it once and then just play the animation. Any other questions? Guess not. Well, thank you. And yeah.